Hi, everybody, and welcome to Charlie McGrath's Wide Awake News. As you can probably tell, I am not Charlie. Our fearless leader is out there on the road doing what he can to keep his day job up so that when he comes here at night, he can really open up his heart. But he is busy, and if he can pop in later, he will do so. Gary Hendershot is gracious enough to not only produce tonight, but Gary will be popping in hopefully with a few questions or two to kind of co-host here, because our guest tonight is a very important guest. And this is Susan Lindauer, who is an ex-CIA whistleblower and also the second, I believe, to be arrested due to the Patriot Act. Susan's link is in the chat room. It's extremeprejudiceusa.wordpress.com. And I want to give you the question of, this is right from her page, what if the government decided to invent a great lie to sell a disastrous war and a questionable anti-terrorism policy? What would happen to the assets who know the truth? Well, I don't think it's very difficult, at least not for the listeners of this program, who I'm glad that you're here tonight from Rents News, and again, Oracle, thanks for being part of this. I think pretty much everyone listening knows that the government is capable of quite a bit of malfeasance and corruption, or they wouldn't be called government. But right now, I would like to introduce you to I think she's a shero. This is a woman who has really stood for what she believes to be true and paid the price for it. And now that she's out, I think that we ought to pay attention to what she has to say. So, Susan, welcome to the program. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Hey, I am delighted to be on tonight. And people, if you're out there and you're thinking about the gun control issue, you ought to think about my story. Because even though we're going to talk about the Patriot Act tonight, my story epitomizes why Americans need to be able to protect themselves from the government, and it really illustrates why the government is more of a threat to ordinary people than they'd like to pretend. They'd like to pretend that that people who support this, you know, that not everybody, but some people in the government would like to pretend that we're kind of nutty if we say that, you know, the people have to have the government could pose a threat to freedom, because they say, oh, come on, you know, that's, you know, 200 years ago when they had the revolution, they had to worry about, you know, protecting, you know, posse comitatus and all this stuff. Nowadays, you can trust us. No, you can't. And my story shows why.
Susan, actually, I want to get into your story first so that people really get the background. So you'll be much better at it than Gary or I will. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because we've got this 2 hours, and I'd really like us to get into as much as we can to expose just who we pay our taxes to.
Yeah, well, I started off as being what I thought was one of the good guys. I was a CIA Defense Intelligence asset working against terrorism, covering Iraq and Libya at the United Nations. Everything that I did was supervised, and I was a back channel. I had been recruited back channel to Baghdad and Tripoli, so I was not off on my own doing something just arbitrarily, you know, going in. Every single thing I did was I was having weekly meetings with both a CIA handler and a defense intelligence handler. And so I thought that my life was, I loved working as a back channel. I hated the sanctions on Iraq, and I had opposed the war, the first Iraqi war. So this was all known. My politics was totally known to the U.S. intelligence community. They were relying on my politics to build these connections, which they could then trade on for intelligence on terrorism. So I was doing the first anti-terrorism, or not the first, but back to '93 in the first World Trade Center attack. I was involved in all of that, going back to the start of the Clinton administration, and I had worked in anti-terrorism for almost a decade. At the time, by the time we get to there was a war in Iraq, and so I had we call them bona fides. I had real bona fides. I gave advance warning about the first 93 World Trade Center attack. That's how they found me. I gave advance warning about the bombing of the USS Cole. Advance warning about 9/11. Ooh. I did one of the first investigations of Osama bin Laden, which we could prove with documents seized by the FBI that were supposed to be submitted to the court. My investigation, my team's investigation, everything was supervised by the CIA and Defense Intelligence. My team's investigation was documented, and before the Dar es Salaam Nairobi bombings in May of '98, when Osama bin Laden had first issued a jihad threat against the United States. So, my credentials were superior. I did the 9/11 investigation. By that I mean I handled Iraq's contributions to the 9/11 investigation, which, oh, by the way, are nothing at all like what you were told. Iraq tried to give the United States financial documents that would have pinpointed the network used by terrorists to gain financing for attacks across the world. Saddam knew it was very valuable, and he wanted to invite the FBI to send a task force into Iraq to receive these documents and to conduct terrorism investigations. Saddam was one of our best sources on terrorism throughout the 90s. They were very worried that the sanctions and the breakdown of social order, the rise of dire poverty in Iraq, would produce a sectarian backlash, and the Islamic fundamentalists would take advantage of it and rise to power. So, I had a long portfolio. If you read my book, Extreme Prejudice, you see this was not just, I wasn't just some goofy little Chiquita running off to New York and saying, oh, I think I want to help the 9/11 investigation. This is what I did for my life. If I had refused to help in the 9/11 investigation, that would have been treason. That would have been treacherous. But there was so much they didn't want you to know. So.
That's all right. Keep going. So you had a background, and you were ready to do your job. So keep going, Susan.
Well, what really please interrupt me and ask questions if you want. If any of that, I'm kind of giving you an idea of how outrageous it was. This wasn't just an accidental mistake where the FBI got confused over the identity of an asset because maybe I was really young, or maybe I was new, and maybe I didn't know what I was doing. I was, quote, incompetent. In fact, I had the best bona fides in anti-terrorism anywhere. We were considered really cutting edge. We had Iraq and Libya. I dated. Now I never go. I know we're on Oracle and Rents, and Jeff Rents knows this. I dated the deputy ambassador of Yemen. I dated the guy. Okay, he's married. He used to tease me that he had a wife in Moscow. This is an Arab marriage, mind you. An Arab marriage wife in Moscow, an Arab marriage wife in France, and I would be his girlfriend in Washington. And then he had a Yemeni wife. But these guys, the people I dealt with were ambassadors, senior diplomats, tied to the Security Council. And so, think what I'm telling you, and if you were to look on Wikipedia tonight, and you should look at that and say, well, she's telling us all this stuff, and then we see what the government said about her, and there's a huge disconnect, a huge reality. Is that a commercial?
Yes, actually, good ears there, Susan. Please stay tuned with us, folks. We'll be taking questions, too, and calls in the second hour after Susan has a chance to really lay out her story. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
Well, and we are back from our break, and during the break, we noticed that Karen was having some fade in, fade out with her Skype connection. She is still there in the background, and I do expect her to chime in if she has anything to add to the conversation. During the second hour, we may try connecting up with her by a cell phone and see if maybe we can get a little bit more solid connection. But I think the 2 tin cups and a string she's using for internet, I think her string got a little bit wet tonight.
Hey.
But in any case,
we
are now in our second segment with Susan Lindauer. And during the break, Susan, I posed a question that really I'm kind of serious about. Now, you were kind of on the fringes of what we call our intelligence community. They considered you an asset. You had contacts within a community that was otherwise unapproachable. So there are those within our government who considered you a source of reliable information. And, of course, you had dealings directly with what you refer to as your handler with the CIA. What I would really like you to address is, from your perspective, having had some experience and had some dealings with these people now, just who the hell is the CIA? Who do they represent? Is this a monolithic organization, or did you detect the fact that there might be various factions all vying for control? What do you think? You were kind of on the front lines of us. Give us your perception.
Well, let me just add to that. As far as being an asset, George Tenet testified on Capitol Hill that before the Iraqi War, he could count on one hand the number of Iraqi agents helping the CIA. And I was the one of only 3 assets covering the United Nations. Now, here's the thing about an asset. When I say in direct contact, I mean I met with the ambassador. I met with senior diplomats. I was an asset who was a primary source of direct contact. I was the eyes and ears. The Iraqis would give me messages to give Washington, and I would deliver messages from Washington to Baghdad. And so around the whole, before the Iraqi War, there were a total in the whole world of 5,000 assets for all countries. And it was a very elite group of people.
Certainly
a lot of them are corrupt. The Iraqi assets were mostly Iraqi exiles who were notorious liars. And they were already known to be, totally fabricating stories and inventing excuses to justify receiving millions of dollars in black budget monies from the CIA. And this takes us to your question. Who the heck are these guys, CIA? Where are they getting their money? How is it that they're dealing in black budget funding? Where does their black budget funding come from? And it comes from covert activities. It sometimes includes money from heroin trafficking. Not everybody. However, we know that Iran-Contra was involved in drugs. The Lockerbie bombing that ended up getting blamed on Libya actually pertained to the CIA infiltration of heroin trafficking in the Bekaa Valley, and they were trying to cover up the profiteering that was going on. They were trying to hide it. The Defense Intelligence Agency had McKee, a defense intelligence analyst, operative, had requested that Washington send out a team to do a live investigation of the heroin trafficking and the thefts off the heroin budgets, the profiteering, and how the CIA was getting kickbacks from Hezbollah for intelligence on whenever the U.S. was about to close ranks and bust the hostages that were being held in Beirut. Terry Anderson, Jerry Levin from CNN, Terry Waite, the Anglican emissary. And so you see that the CIA has like a double personality. And it's very important because there's good CIA and there's bad CIA. And some of the bad CIA is really, really, really bad. They're as bad as you get. And this is the kind of society that is not supposed to be moral. They're not supposed to have high moral value. I was considered a Girl Scout. I remember my old defense intelligence handler used to say, Susan, if you get hurt, you don't come back and cry, because this is like you're playing with big boys and they're going to beat the crap out of you because you have totally different value system than they do. And the thing is, CIA is not monolithic. It is not, in no way is it marching in lockstep all towards a common goal. These are people who are fighting dirty to undercut each other, to stab each other in the back, even though we're supposed to be on the same team with the same agenda. That's how 9/11 happens. You could have, and I think we did, I think it's fair to say that probably 85% of U.S. intelligence wanted to stop 9/11. The problem was that 10 or 15% wanted to make sure it did happen, because I learned about 9/11 from the CIA. I was told by my CIA handler in April of 2001 that I should deliver a message through my back channel that we were demanding intelligence on any conspiracy involving airplane hijackings and a strike on the World Trade Center. And if Baghdad received that intelligence and failed to give it to us, we'd bomb them back to the Stone Age. And I think that he did want to stop 9/11, but the problem was that others were looking at the same threats of war, and they desperately wanted to maximize the damage done to the World Trade Center, which we
Susan,
already knew was the target.
Susan, I'm going to have to ask you to hold it on that thought, and we'll pick that one up right after this break. So please do stand by. We'll be right back with Susan Lindauer right after these messages. All righty, and we're back from that break, and I tell you, during the break, I was coaching Susan a little bit to, keep that level of anger up there, because it sounded to me like she was just getting hot on it, when we had to take that break. So Susan, what do you think? You still got the blood pumping? You still ready?
I got the blood pumping. I mean, the thing you guys have got to understand is the reason that when they talk about 9/11 is as a conspiracy, or it's dismissive. They're trying to say you shouldn't care about this stuff. You should all the information the government's telling you about terrorism. You don't need to worry about the government. You don't need to worry about your civil rights. It's not like there's a conspiracy or anything. You nutty people are just you got these tinfoil hats on. You need to take off your tinfoil hats and stop worrying so much.
Well, now, Susan, I have heard that...
If you look at my situation...
I heard that George Bush and Dick Cheney were down in the basement of the White House playing this thing that kind of looked like an Xbox, flying those airplanes into those buildings. Now, I've heard that over and over again. It sounds to me like, they knew exactly what was going on the whole darn time. Are you going to burst my bubble and tell me that it was, one group of boys who were just a little bit off the reservation?
No. Listen, I was told in May of 2001, when I first told the Iraqis in April of 2001 about the threat of war, I was very polite about it. My CIA handler said to me, "I didn't tell you to be polite to those blankety blankety blanketies. I told you to tell those blankety blankety blank sand niggers is what he called them, those towel heads, those blankety blank Arabs. I told you to tell them that we're going to bomb them back to the Stone Age. I want you to go back and deliver the message exactly as I have told you. And I want you to tell them this message does not originate from the CIA, this message, or from you or the CIA. This message, quote, and the reason I'm quoting precisely is when you're an asset, you're a back channel, they give you a message and they want you to deliver it exactly precisely as they have told you. They do not want you to deviate one single word, because that one single word communicates the genuineness of their argument, and it's very subtly crafted. So the way that they've already thought about the implications of this. So the way that he said it to me was, I want you to go back and tell them this threat originates from the highest level of government above the director of the CIA and above the Secretary of State.
Are you telling me Goldman Sachs issued a hit on him?
No, there's only well, actually, who controls the presidency? You got to say, but there's only 3 people above those individuals,
well,
and that's how they did it without naming.
Tel Aviv is over the government. London is over the government, and then Goldman Sachs, right?
Okay, it's President Bush, Vice President Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld. And that was the message to communicate to Iraq in May of 2001. And the way that they did it, they didn't have to, it was done without naming them, but that's how it was done. Because that's the message. That's how it was communicated. Above, the threat originates above the Secretary of State and above the CIA director. And there's only 3 people in that category.
Oh, okay. So we're talking about it within the hired help anyway.
Within the hired help, yes. You got it.
So, so you were to deliver the message that, George Bush was going to strip down to his boxers and come over there and kick Saddam's butt unless
there you go. Right. Unless they gave that stuff to us. And then all through the summer we talked about it. But we talked about the 9/11 scenario. We talked about an attack on the World Trade Center, and we also talked about and this is something that people get confused about, and they say, well, you believe only in the airplane hijackings? What about the controlled demolition? I believe the airplanes, whether they were hijacked or not, the story of the airplane hijackings was a cover and deception operation. It is a classic mode where the CIA, it's like a magician's trick, whereby all eyes are on the left hand, but the real action is done by the right hand. And so all eyes are on the airplanes flying into the towers, and the mind says, oh, I see. The buildings have fallen down because the airplanes crashed into them. But that's not what did it, obviously. It was a controlled demolition. And they used that as a smokescreen for that.
You don't have any inside information, though, of who might have wired it, because when you start talking about a controlled demolition, you're talking about a process that takes a considerable amount of time in advance to set up.
Yes, it does.
And it takes somebody extremely knowledgeable about how buildings go up to make sure they come down.
And they have to have
like
the architectural blueprints.
Bingo.
I have spoken.
Or they have to be working on the elevator system, and I understand that there was a firm.
And they were. They were working on it for months. But I've spoken with somebody who was in Utah, whose poor reputation has been defamed badly, and so if I give you his name is True Ott, OTT, and some of you will say, oh, he's a charlatan. I don't think so. His story rings true. He says that he spoke with someone from Scandinavia who had told him before that a year before the World Trade Center attack, he was a demolitions expert, and he was asked to present a plan, a confidential plan, for how to take down the World Trade Center and where the explosives would need to be placed. And Truott is his name. He's in Utah. His reputation was destroyed. He's a very, very good man. He's a very honest man. He speaks as an honest man. And when I hear that somebody's reputation has been destroyed, I have only to think about what they did to me and to compare what all of the things that I did and all of the things that you were told I did, and how the government absolutely tried to murder my reputation, and even, to the point of locking me up in prison and threatening to forcibly drug me with a chemical lobotomy of Haldol, Ativan, and Prozac. Even though I was like, I would go in. My judge was Michael Mukasey, who was hearing Larry Silverstein's insurance claims on the World Trade Center, and literally, I would go into court when and vice versa. His attorneys would Larry Silverstein's attorneys would be going in or out of court, and my attorneys would pass in the hallway, and I would be going. Some of this time I was in prison. And I was like in tears, and I'd come into court in shackles. And those blankety-blank attorneys, I don't know if I can say this on the air, would be in the courtroom listening to me weep. Please let me have a hearing. We knew about the 9/11 attack. I have witnesses. I want to call them. Please don't drug me until I have a chance to prove my story. I can prove everything. And the Bureau of Prisons knew this because my witnesses confronted the Bureau. They were not passive. Nobody in my who's got a relationship to me is passive. They confronted the Bureau of Prisons, and they said, Susan's story's true. They confronted the FBI. Before the 9/11 Commission report was ever released in September of 2001, in September of 2004, September of 2004, a year before I was sent to prison, and while George Bush was still running for office, seeking re-election. One of my witnesses was interviewed by the FBI and told him in front of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, told the FBI that I had absolutely warned about 9/11 and provided a very detailed explanation of what I said. My CIA handler and Defense Intelligence handler spoke with a horrible reporter at the New York Times, David Samuels, telling him about the 9/11 warnings. David Samuels then pilloried me, excoriated me, wrote the most horrible story for the New York Times Magazine. Richard Fuse had said that I was the smartest
Susan,
woman.
We're coming up on that break again. I'm sorry to keep doing this to you, but
no, it's all right.
It's
not
one of
a
those
problem.
things.
That's how it goes.
It's a commercial-supported broadcast, and we got to be kind. Got to be kind to our commercial advertisers. Please do stand by. We will be back right after these important messages. Appreciate everybody being patient with us during the commercial break, and I think during the commercial break we might have gotten Karen Quinn-Tostado's string dried on her 2 tin cans and a string internet connection. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Karen and let her take it from here. Go on, Karen, take it away.
Well, we'll see if it works. Actually, it's my tinfoil hat, literally.
And you are standing on your right foot, right?
Well, I'm not on my head yet. I'm sitting down.
And hold that tinfoil a little higher and take it away.
That's it. We'll see how it goes. And I'm glad to be back here. I did want to touch on also about the funding because I find it pretty interesting. There's a recent documentary that I posted on UnitedWeStrike.com, and it's on the video section in the documentaries, and it's about 9/11 and collecting the dust. I haven't had a chance to really do research on the who's who. It certainly sounds plausible, and one of the claims is that in September of 91, Bush Sr. and they called them elite, but we know elite means evil, lying, inbred, traitorous, eugenicist bankers, that they financed a $240 billion covert war chest through the purchase of 10-year securities, which, interestingly enough, would have been due September 12th, 2001. And it was covert action against Russia, supposedly called Project Hammer, where they used the bonds to buy up Soviet industry, oil and gas, that crashed the economy, and that actually naval intelligence was investigating this. And they just happened to be taken out in the Pentagon. And then also the other two big there were 3 security companies that were in the 2 towers as well. And when you were talking about the planes and things, Susan, while they're planes, I think, maybe remote controlled planes or drones, I don't think that these were real planes. And when you watch this, it's interesting too, because the renovations that took place in the 2 towers took place shortly beforehand, and the planes pretty much hit in those areas, which is also pretty fascinating. It was Cantor Fitzgerald. There was also Euro Brokers and Garbon Capital. So while the naval intelligence was investigating this, they were taken out with a hit on the Pentagon where they lost, I think, 39% or 31% of their fatalities. And then 41% of the Pentagon fatalities were from the 2 companies managing the U.S. securities as well, the Cantor Fitzgerald and the Euro Bankers. So it's kind of a very interesting thing. When you start to follow the money and you connect it to government, you'll find out God's our prophet. We've all been sold out. And one of the questions that's in the chat room, Susan, is how are you able now to speak about this without fear of your life? I guess we should get into, though, you did the prison time. First, let me go backwards. How did you end up, Susan, going to prison? What did you do that so infuriated him?
Well, I did two. There were two things that I knew. One was the 9/11 warnings, and I had called the Office of Attorney General John Ashcroft and the Office of Counterterrorism in August of 2001, and I took away their deniability. Of course, at the time, I thought that they would want to know about a major terrorist threat on the United States that was being discussed widely by the CIA. But that was one thing that they decided they had to hide at any cost. The other thing that they had to hide at any cost was the Iraqi peace option that would have resolved the conflict in total without firing a shot. And that included all of it was comprehensive. It included all of the following. Weapons inspections. I did the weapons inspections talks with Iraq's ambassador, Dr. Saeed Hassan, before it got passed over to the Security Council, and before it got passed over to the technical writers. They had already agreed to everything we wanted them to do, and it was a done deal. And so the United Nations was just a rubber stamp to U.S. policy. The second thing was cooperation with anti-terrorism. They agreed to allow the FBI to send a task force into Iraq with authorization to conduct terrorism investigations. They offered to give the United States financial documents on al-Qaeda, on early and proof of early al-Qaeda relations to the 93 World Trade Center attack and the Oklahoma City bombing. Specifically the Oklahoma City bombing, showing that Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, who had been traveling to the Philippines at the same time that Ramzi Youssef, who was the mastermind of the 93 World Trade Center attack, they were both visiting the same Islamic university in the Philippines at the same time. And so this financial network tracked from the Middle East, from Saudi Arabia, into Europe, all the way to Indonesia and the Philippines. So this was a wide network. This was information. If you were serious about anti-terrorism, this is stuff you would want to get. The other thing that the Iraqis offered was special preferential contracts for American corporations in healthcare, pharmaceuticals, hospital equipment, transportation. They offered to buy 1 million American manufactured automobiles every year for 10 years. They offered us preferential contracts in telecommunications. That meant the CIA would have maximum spy capability on all things tied to Iraq. Satellite phones, satellite television, everything you could possibly, any kind of telecommunications, internet, would have been controlled by the United States in the new Iraq post-sanctions. And oil. And this was very significant. Iraq promised to give the United States maximum access to its oil. There was no reason to go to war at all. We could have had as much oil as we wanted, and we could have purchased. We could have controlled purchases of oil equipment and the pipeline repair work. All of this stuff. This is, the excuse for war becomes pretty thin, very thin. Democracy. There was a platform a year before the invasion that Saddam Hussein would step aside would allow elections to occur, and the Iraqi exiles would be invited back to the country to live in expanded embassy domiciles with embassy security and the right to create political parties and media to support their political messages. They'd have the rights to campaign throughout the country, and free elections would be held within 18 months that would be supervised by Jimmy Carter. And, all the proper democracy, pro-democracy watchdogs that we associate with, good government. Saddam Hussein, it was proposed, might not even be around. He might really like to retire to a villa and have his Revolutionary Guard, a handful of Revolutionary Guard loyalists protect him in retirement for the rest of his days. There was never talk of taking $1 billion from the Iraqi people. They didn't have $1 billion. All he wanted to do was retire. That's it. He wanted to go to a villa in the country and leave political life. Now, why couldn't you let that happen? What was wrong with letting that happen? This was the stupidest war. And when it starts to go bad, which is almost immediately, the government became terribly worried that the people the idiots, the stupid loser idiots on Capitol Hill who forced this war down our throats would lose their office. The people would hear the truth, and they would attack. The people would throw them out of office. They would be held responsible for their actions, and so that had to be stopped at any cost. And that's when I made a fatal mistake. It turns out I did not pull a Bradley Manning and just go to the press. I wish that I had. If I had had a Julian, for those of you who hate Julian Assange, consider this. Somebody like me is schooled in secrecy. I did not know at that stage how to interact with the media. I had been programmed. I feel like now I am deprogrammed. I'm like from a cult. The CIA is like a cult. It really is. It's a cult. And they indoctrinate you that you have to be afraid to expose who you are and what you're doing. You know, intelligence is so valuable that it could be a threat if it's gotten into the wrong hands. Well, that's garbage. You know, we need to demystify truth, and we need to insist that we are a democracy and the people have a right to know this stuff. We, the people, need to have this information so we can make better decisions and guide our leaders more effectively. But that's not the way that I started off thinking. I started off thinking, 10 years ago, that maybe you guys couldn't handle the truth. So I needed, if you're anybody who doesn't like Julian Assange or WikiLeaks, there may be very good reasons why you think you don't. But I'll tell you, whoever they are, whether it's Julian Assange or somebody else, people like me depend on that to get through our own inabilities because we're crippled. We are really crippled. I mean, I had to go through 5 years of sheer hell on the Patriot Act, and before I could finally break out of the mentality that I had to stay quiet, and that I had to, the government was going to, I was one of the good guys, and therefore the government wasn't going to screw me, because why would they screw me? But by the time I got through the whole thing, and my reputation was it was trashed. It was like the part of my soul that had ever trusted the CIA was totally destroyed. And I had trusted my CIA handler and defense intelligence handler, who refused to speak to my attorneys.
Okay, Susan, wrap up that thought, Susan. We're coming up on another break here in about 30 seconds.
My CIA handler, and while I was under indictment, even my own handlers, who I had trusted with my life, refused to give me a defense. They refused to even have a conversation with my attorneys. We'd call them, and they'd hang up the phone on us and shout expletives. To hell with you! We're not going to do this. And they were ready to totally destroy me. The people I trusted most in life.
And this was basically because they wanted war, and they didn't want you to let the American public or the world know that Saddam was ready to play ball, not only to play ball, but he was throwing extra balls over the court, including all the rules, and he was ready to do whatever it took.
Yes.
All right. On that note, we're going to go to a break. Folks, if you have questions for Susan, and Susan, when we come back, people are wondering why you are able to speak freely now. They are wondering some things. So, folks, if you have questions, call in 877-342-6673, and I'll be right back with Gary, Susan Lindauer, and my tinfoil hat. All right, welcome back to the Charlie McGrath Show. If there was a better time to be alive, well, we don't know about it because we're stuck here and now. And we've got Susan Lindauer tonight, the ex-whistleblower and author of Extreme Prejudice, the terrifying story of the Patriot Act and the cover-ups of 9/11 in Iraq. So when we talk actually, Susan, about what it was that you did to get yourself in jail and in prison through all of this horse crap thrown at you by the government, it basically boils down to the Patriot Act. So let's get into that.
Yeah, I'd love to take questions from everybody. I hear that you guys are curious as to how I can talk, why I'm not afraid to talk anymore. I refuse to be afraid. They had destroyed my reputation so badly. If they had attacked me less vigorously, I might have limped away and just into anonymity forever. But the viciousness of their attack was so complete that I felt that it just every action produces an equal reaction, and I believe that the violence that they used against truth meant that the truth was very important. And not that I was necessarily important. I have never seen myself that way. It's the truth itself that matters. And I am just a vehicle, a messenger for it, like the fact that we had advanced knowledge of 9/11 and there was the peace option on the table. But ironically, I'm very accustomed to thinking of myself as being small compared to these great important issues. The reason you don't know anything about this is the Patriot Act. I became the second, 30 days after I requested to testify on Capitol Hill, I woke to hear the FBI pounding on my front door with an arrest warrant, and I became the second non-Arab American ever indicted on the Patriot Act. And that's something that I think that this audience is, I'm preaching to the choir here about how awful it is, but the general public only believes the Patriot Act applies to international communications. They don't know what the Patriot Act really does in actual life. And it's after all of us, any one of us who opposes the government, who challenges, who comes to a point of maybe achieving some change. If you are disruptive, you are now guilty of sedition. And if you are guilty of sedition, sedition is now equated to violent overthrow, because anything that causes the elite to break a sweat, to worry about whether their financial nest egg from Wall Street, the IPOs that are offered to members of Congress under the table, and how they're all profiting for, they come to Congress so their wealth can be enriched, aggrandized by 5 times over. So they come in maybe having $500,000 in the bank, they leave with $10 million, and they want that. They're looking for the rich contracts for themselves. They don't care about us. They're not capable of solving our problems. They don't want to solve our problems. They're out there to get elected. And so somebody like me comes along, or somebody like you, and we are now, if we challenge them, if the secrecy is being used to protect them from accountability to us. And that's what it's all about nowadays. It's like if something might embarrass the government, it's classified. We couldn't tell the people. And then the government is protected to go about its corruption, its mediocrity. It's and people say, well, you think the government is bad? I think some of the government is good. Like I said, 85% of the CIA wanted to stop 9/11. The 10 or 15% that were willing to throw away the 3,000 American lives, that's the people you have to worry about. But unfortunately, they have a disproportionate impact if they choose to.
The higher positions and everything, that's true. Now, when they knocked on your door and you were thrown in jail due to the Patriot Act, the only thing that you were doing was your testimony and to hopefully prevent the war that... And all
That's right. That's right. And the thing is, when they hit you with the Patriot Act, I was hit with secret charges, secret evidence, secret grand jury testimony. I was never in 5 years, allowed to receive one single FBI interview of my witnesses. Not one single grand jury statement in 5 years. My first attorney, who was a public defender, very weak, very mediocre, frightened of the overwhelmed in a complicated case like this one. He signed a document saying that he would give no information to me, that the government did not agree in writing he would have permission to give me. So the prosecutor, he willingly tied his hands, and then they refused to let me change attorneys. Even when my uncle tried to fire my public defender and have my uncle take over my case. He's a great attorney, 40 years in the law. The judge said, no way. If she changes attorneys, we will revoke her bail until the end of the case. She's going to stay with this guy right here. And
well, now
that's illegal.
Well, they make up the rules. You know, we're all under this legal economic conquest. But when they did knock on your door, and you say that for 5 years, so did they take you immediately to jail? Where were you kept? What happened to your apartment? I mean, over this 5 years, it sounds like your life.
My life was completely shattered. I was initially given bail of $500,000, but they had gagged me, which if you speak in this was like a treason case. This was high treason, is what they were pretending. And if I spoke at all, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. So at first, I was honestly cowed. I was afraid to speak out because I was just thinking, okay, I'll have to wait till I get my day in court, and then I'll tell everything. And so I was very aggressively preparing a defense for myself. But then when they realized that I was never going to take a guilty plea, they invoked the second rule of the Patriot Act, which shocks everybody, which is NDAA, with the NDAA rule, which is that they can detain you on the Patriot Act with no right to a hearing. And that's what they did to me. I was then ordered to go to Carswell Air Force Base and surrender to Carswell Prison for a, quote, psychiatric evaluation to determine my competency to stand trial. And under federal law, you're only allowed to hold somebody for 120 days maximum. And my review should have been completed in about 4 to 6 weeks. Usually these things are boom, boom, fast, and 9 times out of 10, or 100 times, no, 90 times out of 100, okay, the psychologists are like, of course you can stand trial. There's no reason that most people are not capable of standing trial. It's supposed to be used only for the most extreme, like schizophrenia. You can't bathe, you can't clean yourself, you can't function in society, you're breaking down, weeping constantly, you're hysterical constantly, you have to be heavily medicated, you're pretty much in a vegetable state. You pretty much have to be a walking vegetable to be able to be considered incompetent. And this is what they tarred me with. And so that's why I started off the conversation saying, look at my bona fides and then look what they did to me. And the reason they got away with it was the Patriot Act. Because under the Patriot Act, there was they flat out refused to give me a hearing. Even when my public defender refused to defend me, my uncle, who was an attorney, spoke up for me, and he filed papers to the court saying that he was petitioning on my behalf for the hearing. And this was ignored and rejected. The whole thing was insane and very dangerous, except that it even got worse than that because they wanted to forcibly drug me. And at that point, they had denied who I was, and they had tried to destroy who I was. And then I was just like, to hell with you, I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight as hard as I can.
Hang on, Susan, and I'm going to fight. Back again, if you have a question for Susan Lindauer, 877-342-6673. We'll be right back after this. We're coming right back in. All right, we're back with Susan Lindauer, and they're knocking on your door, and they're giving you options when they do pick you up under the Patriot Act. And your options, Susan, were?
Well, here's the thing. What happened was I was free on bail for 18 months, And then then two things happened. The Democrats announced they were going to hold a private inquiry on Iraqi pre-war intelligence and whether or not Bush was punishing assets who had first-hand contact with the events, and in order to suppress the truth. And of course, I would have been, featured prominently in that. The second thing was that Colin Powell, Secretary of State Colin Powell, decided that he was going to go on a speaking tour, declaring that nobody that no one in the middle of no mid-level folk in the intelligence community had warned him about that intelligence before his speech at the United Nations might be faulty. You remember in February of 2003, he gave a big speech at the United Nations, telling everyone that there was all these, making all sorts of accusations about Iraq's chemical weapons capabilities, and it was all coming from the Iraqi exiles, and we all knew it was wrong. And the problem was that I had for Colin Powell, not for me, was that I had tried to warn him. He lived next door to my CIA handler, and I had gone to his house and left him a packet of information describing the comprehensive peace framework and denouncing the Iraqi exiles. I said, you should not trust anything that they're saying to you. We believe there will be no weapons of mass destruction found in Iraq. And so 2 weeks before I am ordered to go to prison, Colin Powell gives an interview with Barbara Walters on 2020, which was just absolutely, he should have been court-martialed for that, because American soldiers died because of his lies. And this is the kind of, if you're going to go after General Petraeus for having a stupid affair, which is his private business, then what about a general who, what about court-martialing a general whose deception costs the lives of American soldiers and causes them to have suffer severe injuries and bankrupts our country and ruins the morale of the military? What about that?
Right, well, anybody with a first name of Colin, I think we better beware of. But right now, we've got our fearless leader here on the line. I think Charlie McGrath, are you there?
I'm here, Karen. It cracks me up with your Colin comment, and fascinating program. And I'm content just to listen, but I do want to thank you for you and Eric for filling in for me. And I'll let everybody know I'll be back tomorrow.
Gary.
But
Eric's in the chat room. Gary.
And, pardon me?
I said you're thanking me and Eric, but it's Gary and me. Eric's in the chat room.
Right,
oh, good. Okay. Well, listen, I'm glad to be on tonight, Charlie.
I'm happy to have you, and I can't wait till I can listen to the archive. Gary will get it posted later, because I just now have been able to call in, and just listening to what you disclosed about Colin Powell. This is a region of the world that I fought for George H.W. Bush in. And this continued propagation of expansion of our empire is an absolute crime against the people of this country. And you mentioned the American lives that are lost, and there have been a lot of them, and countless other national lives lost in these nations that were invading under false pretenses. Absolutely.
I totally could not agree with you more. We're seeing the same thing happen with Syria. They have invented a story that President Assad might use chemical weapons, and in fact then you see the Syrian rebels, the Free Syrian Army, using chemical weapons, blowing up mosques, executing prisoners, torturing people, beheading people and dumping their bodies in the streets. Horrible things.
It is horrible. And how long are we going to buy this lie? How many times will we buy the WMD story? It just never ends. They keep dragging out the same arguments, but I guess as long as they keep working, why not run with them? We saw in Libya, the folks that we were allegedly fighting as Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Afghanistan months before ended up being the air quote freedom fighters of Libya, and now they've just transferred over to Syria. And it's just a matter of time before we're drug into a bloodbath there.
Yes. And what we've got to realize is these are Islamic radicals who do not share our values. They do not support any type of democracy that we would recognize. They have no intention of supporting human rights. In Libya, massacres happen daily. Bodies are dumped in the streets overnight to scare families. People are literally driving down the street, and someone will thump on the window of their car, and a crew of thugs, gangs of thugs, militias will drag them out of their automobiles, carjack them. If the women are involved in women's rights issues, defending the rights of Libyan women not to get married, things that we take for granted, marriage rights, like the right to refuse a marriage proposal, is now illegal in Libya. Hillary Clinton is a feminist, really?
All right, guys. I'm sorry. It's a good discussion, but I hear that music in the background. So, Mr. McGrath and Ms. Lindauer, we're gonna have to hold up right there and take these important commercial announcements. Please stand by.
Well, I don't know who's knocking on your door, but I know that Charlie McGrath is on the phone with us still. I believe, Charlie, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Welcome back to your program.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's all right. We have another caller, though, too, for a question.
Okay.
Should we take Lark from Texas?
Well, hi,
Lark,
Karen.
are you there? Hi, Lark. Thanks for listening. What's your question or comment?
Well, I am enjoying the conversation very much. You mind if I ask Susan a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
Oh, good. Susan, are you still living in Seattle?
No, no. I live in Maryland.
Okay.
I've lived in Maryland for like 20 years.
Oh, okay. Well, my mistake. I've heard you many times on the radio, and I somehow got the impression you once lived in Seattle.
I did. I lived in Seattle when I first got out of college, but I hate to tell you how long ago that was. It was many, many years ago. And I did come out to Seattle to do a talk, and they taped it and they show it on their community access channel sometimes. So that's probably why you think that I lived out there. I still live out there.
Well, I've often heard you sprinkle your conversations with words like democracy and fascism. So,
yes.
I wanted to know, first of all, if you were familiar with the term communitarianism.
No, I am not. Tell me what that means.
Basically, it is the synthesis of the thesis capitalism plus the antithesis communism. That's what it is. So basically, it is a hodgepodge of corporatism, crony or gangster capitalism, combined with British mercantilism or free trade.
I like gangster capitalism. I like that. I like that expression.
Well, see, they made this decision just prior to World War II that this is the pure form or variant of socialism that they were going to come out with. Now, the British Fabians were at the forefront of this. The Fabian Society in London was formed in 1884. H.G. Wells came out with his book entitled The New World Order in 1939. And so him and of course, he was one of the founders of the British Fabian Society, along with others. But Mahatma Gandhi was talking about communitarianism in addresses before the Round Table during World War II. And, of course, he was also a Freemason and a bar attorney. But the reason I bring this up, because there is a wonderful lady named Jackie Patru, has a website called Sweet Liberty. And I have so much respect for her. I think that it would be wonderful if you got to know her work and maybe some of the listeners, because she defined democracy as a euphemism for communism.
Oh, my.
And that's why I love to reach out to you and have a discussion with you sometime, because you seem like a bubbly lady that was royally kind of screwed over, I'd say.
That I was. I want to be a survivor, though. I had a wonderful companion who died of cancer 2 days after I was granted, the court finally granted our request for hearing, which only happened after 4 years. And he told me that I should take responsibility for my values. And he was with me for 4 years of my 5-year ordeal. And he refused to let me feel sorry for myself. He said, you should be, this is what you stand for, and if it means anything to you at all, this is now you're going to find out if you really care about what you've said you've cared about all your life. And most people never have the chance to find out if they really care for what they believe in. And you are one of them, and so you should consider this a positive thing in that sense. That you shouldn't, he refused, absolutely refused to let me feel sorry for myself. He said, take responsibility for your choices and face the consequences, and if they're going to send you to jail, you have to, if they're going to convict you, then you have to take responsibility for what they're doing, for what you did to make them do this to you. So that was his attitude.
The only way any of us are defeated is because of false perceptions of scarcity, self-doubt, and especially fear.
Yes, and they want us to be afraid.
Yes, that's so true. And so anyway, I don't want to take up a lot of time. I have been studying these things for the last 7-8 years, only because I've forced myself to be permitted the time to do it. And it's a shame because I was a person that was shall we say, liberal and progressive most of my life. I've lived on the West Coast in San Francisco, Portland, Seattle. My mother worked civil service. My father was career military, and we thought the government could do no wrong. At least my parents did. And yet what we have today is we actually have a very dangerous strain of socialism, which defines the type of governance that we have. The Bill of Rights is being destroyed.
Fascism? Isn't it more fascism?
Fascism
I consider it
part of it.
I consider it corporate fascism. I think that both the Democrats and Republicans are two sides of the same coin, and they've got corporate masters and banksters who are running the gangster capitalism. I do like that expression. I think that we're in a very dangerous age where I think that that we've heard reports that the police are being trained for martial law, and that they're expecting unrest and instability in our society such that they would have an excuse to clamp down and take away the last of our freedoms. And the internet, they want it. They hate the internet. They hate it.
Yeah, Charlie, are you still there?
I think all of us have a responsibility if we're going to take to the public airwaves, and especially since many of us, for instance, right now are past 50. I myself am nearly 60. To at least identify what it is that's causing the great divide among the people of this country. When you have half the people calling the problems of the world fascism, and then the other half calling the problem of the world socialism or communism, and nobody defines their terms, we have to recognize that within American academia today, we have such a person as the father of communitarianism. And he runs the Communitarian Network. He's very influential. He's been a special policy advisor to every American president since Jimmy Carter. His name is Dr. Amitai Etzioni. He's written many books. And what he has described, it perfectly describes what's happening in the public schools today, in all the colleges and universities. And see, since we are past the age of 50, a lot of us don't recognize that this is what was actually afoot and what was happening in those years following the 60s. And it's called outcomes-based education. The people are being dumbed down. Even our professional class, the medical practitioners, the legal practitioners, are actually involved in organized crime, and they're bred to be. They're indoctrinated to be part of organized crime. And so who makes up these people that are running our world today? It's these educated people who have been indoctrinated to become members of a racketeering organization. And this, in effect, is really what socialism is, whether you call it fascism or communism. It is gangsterism.
Lark, I appreciate your call, but I got to give Karen and Susan an opportunity to reply to your comments before we take the next break. So thank you very much for your call.
Well, actually, I wanted to see there, Gary, if Charlie is still on the phone. We have about a minute before break because I'm not sure how long he can hang out. Yeah, Charlie, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I just thought
and
maybe...
I'm hearing the bumper music in the background, so I was getting ready to take us to the break.
All right, we're back here with the last segment of the program. First, I want to check and see if our fearless leader, Charlie McGrath, is still with us and what he has to say, and then we'll touch on where we go from there.
I'm here, and it's a fascinating program. I mean, Mark, absolutely great caller, and I was trying to interrupt him because I wanted to ask him to send me, Mark, if you're listening, and I believe that was the name of the caller, Mark. If you're listening, send me those resources to info@wideawakenews.com because I want to read more on what you were talking about. But Susan, Mark, we're talking. We got into a little bit of crony capitalism, banksters, and the different isms that are being used as dividing wedges in this country. And I could not agree more. I mean, everything that comes out of our so-called leadership in Washington, D.C. is about divide and conquer tactics. They want to stoke their team, be it red or blue. And at the end of the day, as Susan said, they work for the same people. They're the same side, different sides of the exact same coin. It's a two-headed monster. And at the end of the day, they are serving special bankster interests, not the people of this country.
And Charlie, that would have been the argument I would have wanted to bounce off of Lark. Is I understand his point of view. He's into very precise wording on things, and he's got a name that he wants to apply to this monster that confronts us. Frankly, I don't care whether you call it communitarianism. I don't care whether you call it Bolshevik communism. I don't care whether you call it. So I don't care what name you hang on it. The end result is the same. More for them, less for us. We get contained. They get freedom of movement.
Yes.
I don't care what name you hang on it. The evil is the evil, and the enemy of my enemy is my ally. I don't care what name he hangs on that enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Susan.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. I think that let me point out that Obama has prosecuted more whistleblowers than George Bush.
Yeah.
He's carried over all the policies of the Justice Department, all the prosecutions. He's been tougher on speaking truth to power. As far as sending people to jail for this, it wasn't Republicans who had the NDAA; it was a Democrat, a constitutional law professor. And the NDAA, as we all know, allows the military, and it will actually be. And let me add this: it won't be the military. They are corporatizing the NDAA so that military functions can be handed off to private corporations who will run these prisons, these special camps, and profit from them based on how many individuals they can detain, how many inmates are detained. And so there will be a profit motive added into this to take as many citizens as they can. These people can be held without trial, without hearings, without charges, without evidence of a crime. And the Department of Homeland Security has created a manual, a 300-page manual for how to identify the ringleaders and how to isolate them and create solitary confinement, how to blare loud music to break their spirit, how to put them to work and have kind of like a prison camp setting. this is like you can't believe this is like a gulag system that we're setting up in America, and they're going to be targeting us. And they're, but this, and so people say, why do you speak? It's because we must speak. We've got to know our history. We've got to know where ignorance is killing us. It really does. The mainstream media is doing such a tremendous disservice. It's not only dumbing down the population, lulling us to sleep with American Idol and who's worse, who's better, or who's better. X Factor, American Idol. Simon Cowell is our hero, and yet we don't know what really is going on with 9/11. I mean, what you don't know is going to ruin your life.
There's also, for folks who think that maybe some of this is fanciful and you still should check the government, I want to encourage you to go to the homepage of the updated UnitedWeStrike.com and take the link there so you can read for yourself the Army Internment Settlement Manual and see exactly what's planned for us unless we wake. Are you still there?
I'm here. I'm here. Listen, and they want to corporatize it. They do want to hold people on military bases. I don't mean to say that they don't. But within the military base, it is their intention to have a private sector relationship to the military, so that it will be the private sector that runs it. And that is just, this is just showing corporate fascism rearing its head again. That these guys are there's going to be a profiteering motive on top of everything else, which just sickens me. But when I first heard about NDAA, my immediate reaction is, I'm the one they're going to come get, and you're the ones they're going to come get. And the thing is, we have it. People said to me a year ago, do you think we should stay silent and just kind of, and under no circumstances can we, because if you are below radar, one of the reasons they could get me was that I was unknown. I didn't have a following. Nobody knew who I was. I had been the quote, good girl. I had done it the right way. I had not gone to the corporate media to try to tell my story. I didn't know how to. I had bought into the whole secrecy thing, the indoctrination, the cult factor. CIA is a cult. That's really the best. Instead of seeing it like, is it good or bad, is it evil or positive, it's a cult. And this is a cult of secrecy that is just insane how desperately they try to justify not telling the public any detail. The most simple detail that everybody should be talking about, they won't even admit it happened. Anyway.
Okay, now, Lux, are you there? Or go for it, Charlie.
I couldn't agree with her more. She's talking at the beginning of that statement. She was talking about how this is the Democrats and allegedly the most liberal president we've ever had, and the folks on the red team are supposed to be all up in arms because we have this alleged liberal in there, but it's all propaganda. If you look at the truth, if you look at what he's doing, he's more hawkish than George W. Bush. We're waging more war. We're killing more people with predator drones, and freedom has been destroyed more, and the banks have rallied and benefited more under this president as they did the last, and that is the exact way it's going to continue. I did a commentary video the other night on gun control, and the question I asked at the beginning is, are you surprised? Are you surprised that we're seeing this grab for guns? Look, this is the fruition of an agenda. You can't rape a nation. You can't rape the financial future of a nation and give it to a bunch of bankers. You can't plunder the world, spreading an empire and breaking down the strengths of a nation without, at the end of this agenda, having a bunch of people who are totally and completely and utterly disenfranchised. These are the millions that foreclosed. These are the millions who've come off the unemployment rolls. These are the 50 million who are relying on government to put food on their table. These are the folks that don't show in the official government statistics the 7.8% unemployment. At the end of this game, this charade of recovery and this charade of success, you're going to have millions upon millions of people who are extremely upset and feel like they've been completely and totally lied to and abandoned, the agenda must include taking the ability for anybody in this nation to defend themselves from tyrannical government away from them. So, everything you guys are talking about tonight, I agree with wholeheartedly. And looking at it in kind of a time frame, you see the last vestiges of freedom flying out the door, and you see the hard tyranny starting to come to the surface. Take the guns, build out the prison industrial complex, and any belligerent rabble-rousers such as myself, Susan, Gary, Karen, callers, and people listening in the chat room, we have an answer for them, the government would say, and that is this for-profit prison industry.
Charlie, Susan, Karen, I hate to butt in here with my 2 cents, but we're down to about a minute and a half, and one thing we have been very negligent about is pitching Susan's book. So I would but before we have to close out this show, let's give her an opportunity.
My book is Extreme Prejudice: The Terrifying Story of the Patriot Act and the Cover-Ups of 9/11 in Iraq. And the first half of the book is the intelligence on that they were hiding, but the second half is a painful, horrifying story of what the Patriot Act actually means and how it played out in my case. Because I was the second non-Arab American ever indicted on the Patriot Act. And it's horrifying. Wow. You don't even know what the Patriot Act can do and until you've actually lived through it. And we are now in a situation where freedom of speech is sedition. Nonviolent protest is a threat to the government, and that's enough to qualify for arrest on the Patriot Act. You don't have to be advocating violent overthrow of the United States. You just have to talk truth to power, and that's all it takes.
Give us a sign again.
All right. Charlie? You still there, Charlie?
Yeah, I actually. Yeah, I'm still here.
Final words. You go for it.
Okay. Well, Susan, give us your website again and the title of the book.
My book is Extreme Prejudice, and it's available on Amazon and Kindle. And my website is extremeprejudiceusa.wordpress.com.
Thank you very much for coming on, and I hope I hope we can get you back on, and I look forward to sitting in with you for a full hour or 2 hours again in the near future.
I'd love to come on to talk about Iraq, to talk about Iran or Syria or Libya or any of the other things. There's so much that's currently happening right now that is really important. So thank you very much for having me on, you guys.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
All right, we got
Karen, Gary. Thank you for giving a great program tonight and preventing having to do a rebroadcast. And I will see you guys tomorrow night.
Well, Karen, we're down to the bumper music. Why don't you take us out of here?
All right, thanks everyone for listening. Tomorrow night with Bob Fletcher in the second hour. First hour is our very own Eric from Gary, Charlie, Eric, and myself, and Susan. Good night. Take care of yourself, and please tune in tomorrow.